Hi everybody, I hope you're doing really well. So I wanted to make this video and really reach out to the Prime Minister of New Zealand, um, Jacinda Ardern. Obviously, she's been a very popular figure on the global stage. She's been running her country extremely well, especially looking at the way they've handled the pandemic in New Zealand, and they've been one of the most successful countries in managing the pandemic, protecting their population, and implementing many policies that have been, very popular around the world, and they've received a lot of recognition under the leadership of the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, and she's, made headlines with her great leadership. I remember watching a video of hers when there was an earthquake and she was giving an interview and she just, stabilized herself and then continued with her interview, and it was dealt with utmost professionalism. Her character globally has really resonated with a lot of individuals with an interest in global affairs. And that sort of brings me onto this real disappointment in the way she and the New Zealand cricket team and the board have sort of handled this recent cricket series in Pakistan. As some of you know, New Zealand were touring Pakistan after I think it was 18 years to play a series leading into the World Cup. And it was meant to be a very big occasion for Pakistani cricket, who are sort of coming out of exile due to sort of instability in the past, due to sort of the economic and political climate in South Asia, that has really prevented Pakistan from being able to host international cricket fixtures in the country. But over the sort of recent couple of years, we've had many teams that have toured Pakistan, and just to name a few, we've had Sri Lanka come over for a test series, we've had South Africa come over for a test series. We've held the PSL, a couple of editions, and the finals entirely in Pakistan, amongst some tremendous security arrangements organised by the state of Pakistan and the PCB itself. And just as things sort of looked like they were moving in the right direction, a couple of things happened. Firstly, it was disappointing to see that some New Zealand players prioritised going to the IPL. Obviously, it's a very lucrative sort of tournament, so we can't sort of blame them necessarily. But nonetheless, this is, a series leading into a T20 World Cup. It would have been nice for the full New Zealand team to travel, but there are many occasions at the moment where world countries are sort of ICC member countries are choosing to allow their players to prioritise franchise cricket and not send their full strength teams. So that's a little bit of an annoyance, I suppose, as a cricket supporter, somebody who loves international cricket, that we're not getting to see as many full strength teams touring. But nonetheless, let's park that to the side, because that's not really the key issue that I want to discuss in this video. The key issue I really want to discuss in this video is the fact that even after they sent their second string team, obviously a very competitive team nonetheless, New Zealand are a fantastic cricket team in world cricket today. They, had planned the series well in advance. They'd raised a couple of security objections, leading up to the tour in the final sort of weeks, that were addressed, and their security team had given all the green lights again and again. And New Zealand arrived in Pakistan on the 11th of September, amongst all the security that they were guaranteed. All the COVID protocols were followed. And things seemed to go well. We were getting tweets and interviews and presses from the New Zealand players telling us about how much they were enjoying being in Pakistan, how safe they felt, how much they were looking forward to the cricketing sort of series. And then yesterday, as the first game approached, there was excitement in the Pakistani media, on social media, amongst Pakistani fans. Globally, Pakistan are, of course, one of the most popular cricketing nations in the world. And we have a rich history playing New Zealand. We've played them in some epic encounters in semi-finals. In '92, when Pakistan went to win the World Cup, we played you in a very historic and famous game for us in 1992. Again, in the 1999 World Cup, where we made the final, we played in a fantastic game. Again in the semi-finals. So we tend to play New Zealand in some epic games, which has sort of, made this fixture amongst the two countries very, very popular. And as recently as the end of last year, we were hosted in New Zealand. And again, it was a very competitive and fantastic series. and we're one of the few teams that agreed to tour New Zealand, as we did with England earlier on in the year, when other countries were struggling to accept touring inside bubbles during a COVID pandemic that had struck the world so dangerously. But Pakistan showed their commitment to the game, to the international calendar, to New Zealand cricket, and agreed to tour last year, just like they did with England as well. And a couple of years ago, when there was the hideous sort of attacks that took place in Christchurch, I believe Pakistan were the first team to travel to New Zealand thereafter to be hosted, to prove to the world that terrorism cannot defeat sort of cricket, and ultimately we must move on, and we must be united in celebrating this beautiful game and allowing our way of life to continue by playing international cricket at the highest sort of level. And we wanted to prove that New Zealand and its state are fighting terrorism, and it is a safe place for other countries to tour as well. And we did, and that tour went without incident, thankfully. And New Zealand cricket has continued to host fantastic series with all international teams since. So yesterday we were very, very excited. New Zealand were coming back to Pakistan. It's been 18 years since they've had a series. We're leading into this World Cup. And then the news broke with about 20 minutes to go or half an hour to go before the toss that the teams had not actually turned up to the hotel. The fans were not, being permitted to come inside the stadium as of yet. And obviously, we started to realize that something's wrong, and either this match will be delayed or this series has sort of been cancelled. There was some sort of obviously anxious cricket fans around the world wanting to work out what was happening. The initial reports that came out were that players were being asked to stay in their rooms. And then eventually, an hour or so after the initial start or the scheduled start of the game, we were told that New Zealand have taken a unilateral decision to abandon their tour of Pakistan on security grounds. And that in itself is very worrying. It created a lot of anxiety amongst Pakistani cricket supporters. Those people in Rawalpindi, I'm sure, were extremely concerned about their own welfare, not only the players, but the officials themselves, management, coaches, and, of course, the fans and ground staff and everybody else, and just the general population, because when such news breaks, it's sad, it's scary, and Pakistan has unfortunately been the victim of, global events that have led to a little bit of instability in our country, a lot of instability in previous decades. So again, it was like, a hammer blow really to the confidence of Pakistanis in that initial moment, because we weren't sure what was sort of going on. And then as the PCB released its statement, and the fans got a little bit of an insight, and the chairman of the PCB also, Ramiz Raja, tweeted, it was a unilateral decision based on intelligence that the New Zealand government received and then directed it to the New Zealand Cricket Board, who then made a unilateral decision to cancel and abandon that tour, despite having travelled to the country, having done their checks, being provided with the full state-level security for this historic tour of their return after 18 years. They didn't feel the need to, consult the Pakistani intelligence services, the Pakistani government, the PCB, and come to an agreement. They basically made the decision all by themselves on their own government advice, on their own intelligence advice, and did not decide to share any of that information with the Pakistani counterparts that were there. Reports on social media, I think tweets sent out by both yourself, Jacinda, and the PM, sort of suggested that you had a phone conversation where you were assured about the security and the intelligence services of Pakistan, and yet you politely declined to accept their validity and continued with your concerns and decided to abandon the tour. Before I carry on, I think, Prime Minister, safety is paramount for all players. There is no disagreement there between yourself and myself and the majority, if not all, of the cricket fraternity in terms of fans, officials, players. We all respect that. But it feels a little bit unfair in the way you have treated our beautiful nation, our cricket board, our cricket players. When you travel to a country, you trust their government. You trust your hosts. You listen to them and you cooperate with them, just like we did when we travelled to Christchurch in the aftermath of the attacks that took place in your wonderful city. We could have at that point, at the last minute, raised security concerns, but we trusted you. We trusted your intelligence services, we trusted your security services, we trusted your officials and your board in the recommendation that they gave us, and we continued to play cricket. At the very least, if you were to suggest that the security threat in Christchurch at the time that we toured New Zealand was much lower than the intelligence you received, why did you not give us the respect to communicate your concerns in detail and explain to us what the actual threat that you were feeling was? I assure you that the Pakistani government and the PCB would have done everything to protect not only your players. Don't forget there were 11 Pakistani players that were meant to be playing in that game yesterday as well. And they would have completely agreed with you and taken all the steps necessary to either postpone the match, delay the tour, or indeed abandon it. But as not a unilateral decision by just yourselves, but as a bilateral decision between both countries. After all of the negotiation that had taken place, all of the security checks that had already been approved by your agencies and your board, we would have worked together and found a solution during a potential crisis, if that's how you felt the situation was being addressed. But instead, you've taken that unilateral decision. You've, protected your players in your eyes, which we think you have the prerogative and the right to do for sure. But in doing so, in the manner in which you've behaved, you've disrespected our nation. You've undermined on an international scale our intelligence services, our cricket board, our cricket players, and ultimately the cricket fans around the world that love to see international cricket and love to see both teams participate in a hard-fought competitive series leading into the World T20s, which will occur next month. That's disappointing, and I hope you realise the consequences and the precedent that you have now set by behaving in this manner and taking this extreme sort of step. It is not the fact that you decided to abandon the tour, it is the fact that you decided to abandon it in a unilateral sense. It is the fact that you have now set a precedent for any visiting team to just make a unilateral decision based on whatever information they get from their government, which may be credible, but may at the same time not be as credible when there are so many intelligence agencies that are working for the protection of people around the globe. With respect, we believe that our intelligence services are the best placed intelligence services to actually guarantee your safety and security within our country while we are hosting you. As you can imagine, that makes perfect sort of sense. But again, that was not the route that you decided to take, and that was not something that you felt was even worth discussing with us. And what's more sad is the fact that we do not feel, when we look at global cricket today, that New Zealand cricket or the New Zealand Cricket Board would have ever taken such a step if they were touring England or Australia, possibly South Africa. We feel you probably would have had the courtesy to sit down and work together, negotiate, find a bilateral solution that was in the best interest of both boards, both sets of players. By taking this unilateral decision, you've almost suggested that the Pakistan services, in terms of their intelligence services, in terms of the cricket board, we do not seem to care about our players as much as you care about yours, which is clearly nothing further from the truth. You've suggested on an international scale that our intelligence services are not as credible as yours. Whether you meant that or not, that's in essence what you have done. You have also, without giving any sort of information to our board or to our government, you have sort of suggested that every assurance that they've given you is invalid and not worth your while, which again is disappointing considering there is at the very least, a memorandum of understanding between the two nations as full members of the ICC to agree to participate in bilateral series with each other. So you do not clearly seem to respect Pakistan to be a partner of yours in international cricket on an equal footing. And ultimately, that is the crux of the disappointment that Pakistani fans across the world, across social media, are feeling towards New Zealand at the moment. We love your nation as a cricketing nation, as a global partner, as an ally against anything that threatens this wonderful sport and our way of life. But you seem to have completely ignored our efforts over the last 18 years to bring cricket back to Pakistan, to work so hard and guarantee the safety of players, to ensure that, we have fair competition, we have good levels of cricket, we play with each other, we participate in World Cups together, we host you, you host us, we fight against the evils of this world on an equal footing. You've chosen to absolutely ignore all of our efforts on that front and taken a unilateral decision, and as a consequence have hurt the sentiment of many Pakistanis and cricket lovers around the world. Notwithstanding, and this is very, very clear, I do not want to suggest by any means that the decision to protect your players is not paramount, but we cannot use words and a situation in a potential crisis to cover up what we feel is a lot of disrespect towards our nation. And you cannot use and hide behind intelligence which you do not choose to share and make unilateral decisions at the same time as basically trying to destroy the efforts of a nation trying to rebuild itself in the aftermath of the horrendous global events that we've experienced over the last couple of decades. And I hope that this video eventually reaches you or reaches New Zealand cricket fans or Pakistani cricket fans. It probably won't. It's just one Pakistani fan sitting in his living room making a video. But it's important that we have this open and honest discussion because equality is very, very important to many people. And we love watching cricket. But the feeling at the moment is that there are some rules for some and other rules for others. And Pakistan has been at the forefront of helping a lot of countries continue with their bilateral series during the pandemic, in the aftermath of, heinous and horrendous attacks. We have, continued to play cricket, support countries while they've been rebuilding. And at the moment, it seems as if we're not getting the same respect back. And I will turn my attention now to our PCB chairman and our Prime Minister Imran Khan. I would just like to say, I think it's high time that Pakistan became a little bit more self-sufficient. As Pakistani fans, we're not really convinced about the fact that Pakistan are respected on the international level to the level and extent that they should be, considering our efforts and our commitment to the sport. And we need to address and look inside ourselves first and foremost and try and understand why it is that certain countries are treating us in such an unfair manner, in such a disrespectful manner, and try and address those problems internally and at ICC level. But if our conclusions thereafter are still that actually it has nothing to do with how we have behaved, but it's more to do with the fact that we are Pakistan and people, maybe because of our socio-economic status in the world, maybe because our revenue generation is not as high as some other countries, maybe because our population isn't as high as other countries, or maybe because historically we're considered to be a developing nation rather than a developed nation, then we must be very honest with ourselves and really decide whether or not these are the kinds of partners that we want to have going forward when we're trying to arrange bilateral series. Pakistan have a lot of rebuilding to do. there's a lot of things that we can do with world cricket, but maybe we need to start looking more within, just like some other countries are. Maybe in a world where people are prioritizing franchise cricket ahead of Test cricket, where people are deciding that we should send weakened teams to historic, Test series like the Ashes, or a bilateral series gets cancelled in favour of the IPL, perhaps, or players are being rested and weakened teams are being sent out. Maybe Pakistan need to look at our domestic infrastructure and focus more on fabulous events like the PSL, or maybe improve our sort of grassroots level, because we should never be held to account by teams that no longer seem to have the respect for us that we seem to always give to them. I'd like to thank the PCB for their communication in the aftermath of such a sort of disappointing day of cricket. I'd like to at least thank New Zealand cricket on the level that they actually made efforts to come to the country and looked like they were on their way. But we have to at least acknowledge the disappointment we faced with New Zealand, the Prime Minister's sort of decision, the New Zealand cricket's decision, who at the moment there seems to be a little bit of confusion whether it was the government of New Zealand advising the cricket board, or the cricket board were taking advice from the government through its security agencies. I don't think that really matters. Ultimately, that's their internal sort of situation. But, ultimately, cricket was the loser yesterday. Definitely Pakistani cricket and the image of Pakistan as a safe nation has taken a hit due to this unilateral, unprecedented decision that New Zealand cricket have taken. But I hope that common sense prevails. And I hope that in the future that the two cricket boards can sit down, find a solution, and make something positive come out of such a negative occurrence. A disappointing day for cricket, but Pakistan is a very resilient nation. We always bounce back. And fingers crossed, we'll meet very soon next month in the World Cup. Thanks.